Hi, welcome to the ZP Developers webinar. So we like to do this once a week, and it's really just answering technical questions that have come in during the week. So the next slide is always wrong. It says the 9th of February 2025. It's actually the 8th of February 2025. It's just sometimes simpler or efficient just to kind of go on the Saturday evening rather than the Sunday. So apologies, but we do tend to go a little bit early on this. But with that said, I will put some links underneath the video at the end. Give me maybe sort of 24 hours to make sure I get all the links in. But after that, then if you're wanting to get anything through the web store, you can use the 10% discount. With that said, let me go forward a little bit faster. I just kind of say that the questions I'm answering and or dealing with this week is, Sense It All. Is this a platform that is basically faster than doing custom MVP? So minimally viable products, this is something that I'm really a big believer in the tech industry. People do not spend a long time necessarily getting to market. Now that's different, I get it, in medical diagnostics, in sensors it does take longer, but it shouldn't take so long. I mean, I'm aware of companies that spend 15 years developing products before they launch, and that's not to be applauded, that's to be seriously looked at and wonder what's going on here. So I am going to talk about Sense It All this evening, answer some questions about how this can be used as a very rapid way of getting to market. It's not just an MVP. This is a real functioning potentiostat, and we're going to do some demos on it this evening as well. So essentially just watch out for that in a few minutes time. I'll go back to the screen now and just say, okay, I'll talk about the Sense It All. I'll also talk about pH yarn, pH sensitive thread. Can you make pH sensitive thread? And the quick answer is you absolutely can. Now I'm not going to be able to give you the formula tonight how to do that, and I can think about all the problems, but it is fundamentally achievable. I'm not going to be able to give the formula on it, but I am going to give some thoughts on it. So if you're interested in pH sensitive yarn, let's say, and maybe its application in things like wound healing and wearables, then please hang on for that. I am going to talk about self-assembled monolayers and gold. We do support academics through the use of our sensors. We do ask that people actually do purchase our screen printed electrodes and our Sense It All potentiostats, because that's really what funds our capability of giving out all this free material that we do give out on the channel. But I will talk about self-assembled monolayers on gold, and I'll also, this is not a great answer, so this person's been very kind, they've been asking questions, it's stimulated some thoughts in my own head. I'll give you some thoughts, but it's not the greatest answer I've ever given, and I will touch on enzyme sensors at the end. With that said, let me go forward a little bit faster. So somebody was kind enough to send me an email this week, and they said, well, look, that Sense It All platform, to be fair, actually, they understand it's both a potentiostat, so you can do amperometry, open circuit potentiometry, square wave voltammetry, impedance spectroscopy, linear sweep voltammetry, cycle voltammetry. You can do all that, and you can actually very quickly turn it into a go-to-market instrument. So I appreciate them making that realization. I am going to do a demo on it in a little bit to try and illustrate to them actually how what a flexible instrument this really is. They're asking about screen printed electrodes. Are screen printed electrodes single use? Well, if screen printed electrodes are single use or not really depends on the assay that you're doing. There's nothing universal about this question as are screen printed electrodes reusable or single use. It really depends on what you do with them. Every time you see me do it tonight, I will dispose of the sensor, because I can't predict whether that sample is going to left a residue on that sensor. I can't predict whether the assay is irreversibly changing the electrodes. So the safe answer to that question is screen printed electrodes are single use. From a business perspective, it's a better answer that screen printed electrodes are single use. The reason from a business perspective it is, otherwise, you're in the business of trying to guarantee that electrode is never changing when the customer next time uses it. Very hard for you to guarantee that, in fact. I mean, almost impossible. You cannot predict what they're going to be doing with it, how they're going to store it, how they're going to expose it to light, how they're going to leave it in a corrosive atmosphere. You've got no control on that. You've got to have a business model where actually they take the sensor, they use it, they dispose of it. You've got much more control in that situation. So the easy answer is screen printed electrodes are single use. Actually, you can reuse them, but I'm not going to reuse any of mine tonight, especially when I'm doing assays, because I cannot predict what customers are going to do, and before they know, they're complaining and say, "Oh, it's not reproducible." It's like you didn't realize what people do with your material once it actually leaves the facility. The Djuli system is very flexible. You do not need Zimmer and Peacock involved in your use of Djuli. You will need Djuli is a cloud system. In fact, I'm going to use it shortly. Well, I'll be sending some data to Djuli. Let's have a quick look at that just for interest. So Djuli can receive every time I run the sensor all as a potentiostat, every time I run the sensor all as a assay. It sends the data to the cloud. We can process data in the cloud, and we can turn peak height into concentration. All of this is completely open to you, but there is a catch. You do need to sense it all platform, and you do need to, the technology. There's very little point in asking questions. There's a good point in actually getting on the platform and actually using it. So the quick answer is it's very flexible. You don't even need us involved. So I will do a little demonstration on that. They're asking about pH electrodes, and I will, this I've got some slides on. So I'm going to kind of answer question 1 and 2 really by doing a demo, and question 3, their question 3 and their question 4, I'll actually got some slides for that. So regarding screen printed electrodes can be reused. Whether you get customers to really reuse them, I feel it's very risky. You can't do a risk assessment because you really can't determine what people are going to do with your material. So if I was making a real product, I wouldn't have people reusing the electrodes. And Djuli is very flexible. Now what I'm going to do now is I've got my app here. If I'm just going to scan that QR code. In fact, I've scanned it already, and so I'm in caffeine sensing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scan another code in a bit and show you a slightly different version of caffeine. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do some demonstrations to kind of talk about the flexibility of what is actually a potentiostat, and it's a potentiostat that works. What this is it's a potentiostat, but it's really closing the gap between something you can do in the lab and something you can actually do in the real world. So I'm thinking aloud a little bit, but yes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take 50 milligrams of coffee here, and I'm going to put 50 milligrams of coffee in a tube. So forgive me when I do this, and I'm going to do this kind of quicker and a bit more clumsy than than maybe I want, but I'm going to do it essentially all live. I'm going to take some buffer. So often we'll ship a particular reagent when we're doing assays. So what ZP does is, what I'm doing here is I'm demonstrating how we've taken a potentiostat, and actually we're running square wave voltammetry in this particular case, and turned it into a product. So let me just put that in there like that. Right. And now I do actually, just out of shot, I do have a vortexer, because essentially you can see what's going on here. I've got a lyophilized powder. In fact, because it's a lyophilized powder, I could probably just enough to shake it actually. I mean, admittedly, I can shake it there, and I say a lyophilized powder. I should say it's freeze-dried coffee. It's instant coffee. But let me just vortex it, because that will definitely guarantee the dissolution of that material. Right. So I've done the vortexing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 50 microliters of that particular sample, and I'm sort of talking at the same time, because I actually want to make a quick, I just want to make sure I name this. I'm going to name this coffee powder, okay? So just me call it coffee powder. Right, done. Okay, so I've just named that coffee powder. I'm sort of good to go. I'm just going to take 50 microliters of this and put it on the sensor. Really, electrochemistry is such a powerful tool that, an instrument like this, no shielding from light, no, complex optics or mechanical shielding. 50 microliters, quite a dirty sample. You can appreciate if that was blood or urine or something like that. That's, look how dirty that sample is. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to continue, and I'll go start. Now we show the data being gathered in real time, so this is a square wave voltammogram, and I used to think, oh, that's going to be a real problem, but actually I think it's, when I say a real problem, I'm thinking about real users, for example, food technologists working in the quality department of a manufacturer of instant coffee, for example. But I realize, no, it's actually quite useful because it gives them real-time feedback on actually what that data looks like. So what I'm just going to do now is I'm just going to go to screen here, and I'm just going to fire off to here. I will turn whoops a daisy, I'll turn that on there, I will turn that on there, and yeah, I just go here for a second. So I've got a result, and I'm just going to hold this up just real quick and show you that I have a result. Now it says on that screen about 50 milligrams per gram, and that's actually really quite good, so that's what, if you kind of Google that around, that's what you'll find, the caffeine in an instant coffee. So I'll just put that down for a second. This is the really cool thing. I'm just going to go into refresh here. I remember I think I called it coffee powder. There we go. This is the power of it. See that so many potentiostats leave you hanging. And look at that, right? Here's the wave. Look at this oxidation wave here. So this is not caffeine. This is all the kind of polyphenols that people report in many beverages, actually. I mean, probably in teas, probably in coffees, and also in red wines. And look at the way we've managed to eliminate that. And that's because, in fact, in this particular instrument, we have a data pipe, and we've actually done a baseline subtraction using quite a powerful algorithm called an iterative polynomial. And we've managed to basically subtract the background and leave us with a strong caffeine signal. We've turned the peak height using a linear equation back into concentration. I did what's called a 1 in 20 dilution. I've even taken account of that. And so the end user is actually left with the thing they really care about, which is actually the concentration. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold that up. Now what I'm going to do now is a second demonstration. I'll just hold that up. So there you are. There's your 50 milligrams. Now I did that just quickly because what I want to show you then is the flexibility on this particular system. So I'll just change back to here for a second. I will go, because what I want to do is I want to scan that caffeine low range. Yes, caffeine low range. Right. So I'm just going to take the app. I'm going to turn on the ability to read QR codes. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scan the QR code on my screen here. So let me just do that. Whoops, daisy, that's shut. Right, so now I've actually turned this into a different facing app. Well, not different facing app. It's a really interesting point, see, because actually it's the same assay, but what I'm now going to do is, rather than measuring caffeine in a powder, I'm actually going to measure caffeine in a drink. So I've got a cup over here. This is almost like I'm making coffee. So excuse me if I spill anything. I'm going to do this, live. Right. So same analyte, but actually quite a different situation now, because in fact I've just put the analyte, essentially into a coffee cup along with boiling water. And this is kind of, sometimes, we sell a glucose sensor, and that glucose sensor could be used, in blood, in urine, all sorts of places. But you understand the assay has to change because, in fact, same analyte, I get it. But this is a very different situation. So what I'm going to now do is I'm just going to call this coffee drink. Right, coffee drink, come back, cool. Right, so I've got my app set up. Back to your question about, I'm not going to reuse that sensor. I mean, imagine now what I have to do now, especially if this was a real sample. You're going to have to clean that. You have to guarantee that you cleaned it. And you have to guarantee that in the cleaning process, you didn't actually leave anything on it. So the best way of dealing with that, you know, that situation is you take the sensor like that and you throw it in the bin, because, you know, imagine the validation of actually saying, yeah, I got that sensor completely clean, I didn't leave any sample on it. Come on, it's not going to happen. So I put a clean sensor in here, I close that up, job done. I'm going to take love electrochemistry, 50 microliters. It's one of the few, it's almost one of the analytical sciences, especially for the liquid phase, that can work with really small volumes. I wonder if it's the most least requirement for volume of some of the analytical sciences. I've got to be a little bit careful with that statement. I'm just thinking out loud a little bit. Whoops-a-daisy, I took the wrong sample there. What I want to do is I actually want to take that sample. So let me just stir that. I almost took the other one. Right, so it's still coffee, but before I tested coffee the powder, now I'm testing coffee the drink. You can understand that coffee the drink is at a very different concentration level to coffee the powder, but this system can deal with it. You know, I scanned a different QR code which set up the same instrument but in a different way. I'll take the sample. In fact, you can sort of physically see the difference. I mean, that is more dilute. You can see the electrode through that. I'll go continue. Different instructions, start menu. So you can almost understand that actually you could have an assay that, you know, fundamentally was the same assay, but actually you could apply it in many different ways, and that's what we're doing here. The question, what's the caffeine in my drink, is a different question from what's the caffeine in my coffee beans or in my instant coffee. That's a different question. And it will run, and there we go. That's pretty perfect. So I've got a result now, as you can appreciate, with all that dilution of 0.103 milligrams per gram, because I'm actually measuring what's in the drink as opposed to what's actually in the powder. And let me just go back, and so this is my raw signal for the powder. Let's go in here and have a quick look at my raw signal for the drink. Coffee drink. Oops-a-daisy, I've realized I'm not sharing the screen, so I'm going to just do that really quickly. All right, so I've just gone into I'll just go backwards. So we had the coffee powder. Coffee powder looked like this. It was about 50 mg per milligram. The caffeine peak is being picked up quite nicely by the software, and it's also done a good job of getting rid of all that background stuff. I think in academia, people spend so much time worrying about, you know, these interferences, and they're not playing in the maths domain. But you know, look how easy it was for us to just do what's called a baseline subtraction, and I didn't have to program that. I didn't have to get any coding going on that. It's just a choice that I had in the software as well. Now I'll go into the coffee drink. So I can just see it here. There we are. Just picked it up here. It's a much more dilute drink, but it's, you know, it's because we've done an actual, a lot of dilution on that particular coffee powder, and then I've got my concentration also reported here. So what I will now, so I think I'm doing that, but I am doing that demo to basically demonstrate that the SenseIt platform it's probably worth saying that, you know, we sort of launched the coffee powder app in about November, and then we've just recently launched that coffee drink. So the reason these are quite short timelines, and the reason being is because so many people, when they try to develop new assays, you know, they start off by building the electronics, they start off by building the app, they start off by building the screen printed electrodes, and you can see that we understand our platform, and we're really trying to get other people to adopt the platform, because suddenly you can go from idea to products that you can just demo like I just have, you know, really quickly. So I'll go on a bit more now. So same questioner, slightly different question. So I'm trying to understand their question. But I think they may be asking, can we do several steps on a particular screen printed electrode? So for example, step one might be calibration. And so we have developed assays like this, where you have a screen printed electrode, you put a kind of known solution on there, and you will essentially calibrate, and then we'll pipette off that solution, and then put a test solution on there. So we do, you know, I was saying earlier on, you know, I don't reuse screen printed electrodes, but if an assay requires a calibration and then the measurement, and when you're doing an MVP, a minimally viable product slash minimally viable prototype, you may do this. Because otherwise, if you don't do this, you're going to try and get the perfect product. And you've got to know whether your product is really helping doctors or nurses or whoever your target is before you actually go too far. I met an entrepreneur the other day, and his test for whether a product was really worth him investing in was, can I sell 100 of these? You want to find 100 customers to actually prove that the idea he had generally had traction. And so I think so often with ideas, actually, we think that the barriers to our to our ability to start a business, to turn this technology into a product, is scientific and engineering. It's like, can you really sell 100? If you can persuade 100 people to buy this, then that's probably a good thing. But the quick answer to this person's question is, I don't encourage people to reuse sensors, but if the assay requires like a calibration and then a test, we have also done that as well. And when you're in your MVP stage, that's probably an okay compromise to be doing. One way that we have used this in the past, for example, is we've taken tubes like this, we've put lyophilized beads in the tubes. Somebody's added some sort of sample. There may have been something like a lamp assay going on. And if you kind of heat a lamp assay and you've got all the right primers and the target is in there, then often you can actually get a hybridizations going on, and you may get like a pH change. And then actually you can use our device, take a sample from there, read it, and sort of say, is that pH show a, unfortunately maybe a positive, and I take a green for negative, because a positive sometimes in a lamp assay is not necessarily a good thing for the patient, but a negative may be a good thing for the patient. It could be a sexually transmitted disease, etc. So the quick answer is we have worked with that kind of workflow in the past. Now this is definitely now a change of gear. Somebody's asking us whether we can do pH sensitive thread. This is not a pH sensitive thread, but I just put it sort of, sometimes thread, cotton, or thread might not mean something to everyone, but this is the sort of thread that I'm discussing. I'll just put that down for a second, and I will jump into this. I've been interested in wound care easily over 5 years now. I've done quite a few videos about wound care. This next slide is really a philosophy in general, and I do find that people have an idea, they have an application, and they just have this very linear idea. I'm going to do wound care and I'm going to make a new material in order to do that. Now, I would say that there's the final application. There's actually lots of ways of achieving this. So I would actually have a few strategies going on, because in science, if you just follow one strategy very narrowly and it doesn't work and you don't adapt, you're going to get pretty upset, and it could lead to a failure of a PhD, for example. So be a bit open-minded when, especially if it's the start of a PhD. So let's say the big picture is I want to do smart bandages, to detect infection or not in a wound, and I've got an idea. You've got to think, I would definitely broaden out a little bit and think a bit more broadly about this. So I would sort of come backwards a little bit and say, okay, well, in wound care, the pH of the wound, there's quite a lot of papers out there that sort of say that measuring the pH of a wound is a good indicator of its health. If you kind of Google or use ChatGPT and search around on that, you can actually, sometimes they'll actually point you towards ZP. And when you point towards ZP, you find that we've got a very nice wearables platform. So whatever your technology is going to be, whether your technology is going to be a pH thread that you may develop in your lab, or whether your technology is going to be more based on screen printed electrodes like this. And I will give a little talk in a minute about, a pH sensor can be as small and as flexible, I'm sorry, but that is already quite small, and that possibly in most chronic wounds that actually are risk of infection, that's probably already small enough. The good thing about that form factor, do you want another 300 of those, for example? That form factor is already quite manufacturable. Anyway, that said, we do have kind of electronics for a wearable type application like this, and we also have these screen printed based pH sensors. Just grabbing that sheet again, pH sensors as well. Now, one of the attractivenesses of this actually is the fact that you can argue the scalability of it, because people like us can already produce it in quite high volume. there is an elegance to going the kind of pH thread route as well. There's definitely an elegance to it. It's just there's some more scientific barriers in the way because it's got to be made. My biggest concern about doing it on the thread is it will take quite a lot of scientific input, but that's okay. That's what a PhD is for. That's your job. So, for that, it's okay. But then one day, the next person's really got to figure out how to manufacture this. And it's got to be reliable and robust. So, with producing, turning thread into pH-sensitive thread, I think is quite doable. ZP, for example, we're more than capable of doing it. But we won't get involved in a PhD to do it because we need to bring quite an engineering team to the problem. But if somebody was trying to do this as a PhD, I would definitely encourage them to do it because I think the 3-year period for one person working on this is probably long enough to actually pull that off. I'll also show you that this is possible. I've got some slides in a minute. But anyway, what I'm saying here is if you want to make smart bandages, don't just think about one solution. Have a couple of solutions in mind. Each solution can be a chapter in a PhD anyway. And so the first thing is that your final target is in vivo, but you actually want to do in vitro to start with anyway. And so if I was going to do that in vitro experiment, I could, the added value is to make up some synthetic wound-like material, liquid, if I can put it that way. You can set up a test like this on the ZP technology. You can put on a neutral solution. You can put on an alkali solution. You can put on a acidic solution. And actually you can demonstrate as a sort of proof of principle, but also it can be a paper, that actually I can take a wound-like solution and change its pH, and I can measure its pH accordingly, and therefore this will be a platform for doing smart wound care products. So the reason I bring this up is because that is an easier box to tick than the idea that I'm going to first generate this new material, and then I'll be characterizing this new material in the application that I'm interested in. So I'm going to put some links to the materials I think. Now, I'll put these links underneath this video. At least within 24 hours, these links will hopefully be under this video. But it's a pH sensor, pH attached solution, and also electronics as well. That's an important one. So in the first year of a PhD, you want to be able to achieve something. And so you should be able to achieve this if you use those materials. Now, the value add is building the story that these combination of technologies will actually work in a smart wound care. If you're really good, you may even do it, on some sort of animal model as well. So the electronics will be the same whether you're doing, whether you're using screen printed electrodes type pH sensors, which we have, or whether you've developed a new thread. The electronics are going to be the same anyway. So there's a sort of similarity between. The electronics won't change. So the electronics are something that you can invest in anyway, whether you go the thread route or whether you go the screen printed electrode. But I realize in putting these slides together, the true answer will end up being some sort of hybrid actually. You may end up using both printed technology and, let's say, yarn technology. And that may be a real sort of, so imagine that, it's your kind of thesis, chapter 1, screen printed electrodes, chapter 2, development of a pH thread, chapter 3, actually a combination of these manufacturing principles and materials, for example, and that's, starting to make quite a nice thesis. I just wanted to kind of show you that I took one of our pH sensors, in fact, it was this one here, and I started trimming off the bits that you didn't actually need, and so you can actually get down to something like this. I'm sorry, it's already on its way to being the right size for a pH sensor, and that's just by trimming off excess materials that are not otherwise needed. Thread-like biosensors, I just want to say the idea of a thread-like biosensor for measuring pH, it will work. You can do this. Now, ZP can't be involved in that particular part of the thesis because it's a big lift, and our kind of rates and the kind of cost of people in the kind of engineers and scientists is beyond a PhD. But I want to give you some encouragement that you shouldn't give up on the dream, because this is a willing volunteer. This is my arm. I've got a thread-like biosensor stuck in my arm there. So I just want you to know you can make electrochemical cells in a thread-like manner for wearable applications. And this is a real-world demonstration that actually is possible. So I want to say to you, you should go ahead with this. I do want to say to you, you want to start a chapter where actually you use materials that are already available, because you don't know what you don't know until you start, and you have to start. And if you put a big barrier between you starting something, which is, oh, I have to develop this new material, etc., you don't know the problems you've got until you've actually tried. So be careful, because you could put a whole material science project in front of yourself, and then at the end of it make the material and then find out that actually, you know, you weren't making it sensitive in the right pH ranges, etc. So you should think a bit more broadly. Question number 3, they've asked a lot of questions in the past. I've reached out to them. They're like, oh, well, now I'd like to know about self-assembled monolayers. So self-assembled monolayers, the biggest problem with people with screen printed electrodes in self-assembled monolayer making biosense is actually the reproducibility of the gold. ZP has put a lot of effort into reproducibility of gold. I've even talked about how to build aptamer sensors using self-assembled monolayer. So hopefully this link might actually be useful to this person. I'll make sure I put this underneath the video as well. I mean, I'll talk about it in a minute, but hopefully in the link, you know, you have to take these gold electrodes. ZP does have a cleaning solution for gold electrodes. You can't just put thiols straight onto the surface. Many times, thiols actually are in the disulfide form. So sort of 2 thiol atoms, you know, 2 sulfur atoms, I should say, are, you know, linked together, and you need to break that linking. So we do a reduction step. I'll talk about that in the next slide. You need to put spacing material in between them. So you can't just have fairly long chain thiols all clamped up together. They need to be spread out a bit. So we do spread them out a little bit. Then we have the binding event. Thiols, self-assembled monolayers are often used. They're probably often used to actually either couple antibodies to surfaces using, I want to say click chemistry, but there's a sort of EDC NHS coupling, 2 fairly common reagents that people use to bond. And then we actually often run our assays in quite a simple way, where we just use something like ferrocyanide, and we're essentially trying to get to the surface, but the surface gets blocked by the binding. Be careful when you're making SAM layers. Make sure that your thiols are actually not disulfides, but they're actually they're true thiols. So you may want to use a reagent like TCEP, which is a sort of a reagent. We always clean our gold just before functionalization. If you Google ZP gold cleaning, you should definitely find videos about that. And we do use separating molecules, like things like MCH, to keep our molecules essentially apart from one another. There's no generic SOP, standard operating procedure, for making self-assembled monolayers. You have to read enough literature to actually understand that, you know, but there's some key principles here. Make sure that your thiols are thiols, and adding a reducing reagent does help that. Make sure your gold has just been cleaned before you actually activate it. And then also make sure you're using a spacing molecule. A number of times I've seen people just using essentially too many long chained thiols, and they can't pack well enough next to each other. And then we then do characterize as we go. So the pristine gold, the slightly and as you add more materials, the cycle voltammetry often gets distorted. And if it's not distorting, you're not doing the job, is the quick answer on that. This is not a great answer. I do respect the person who's asking the question, but I will try and help a little bit with, you know, enzyme. You know, so I've left out a lot of their question because I do want to respect. If people ask me questions, I will definitely remove material that I think would otherwise harm their grant application, or, you know, maybe some IP that they may be able to generate. So I've definitely taken away a lot of their questions. If I'm looking for formulations for immobilizing enzymes, the world's most robust enzyme is glucose oxidase. You can knock it with a... That's a big statement, isn't it? But it's a pretty robust enzyme. You can knock it with a hammer and it'll still be good. But after that, they will fall off a cliff. If I'm looking for protocols to immobilize a new enzyme that I'm expressing or engineering, I would look up lactate oxidase-based sensors. The key word is lactate oxidase-based sensors. So why do I give this clue? I'm not giving the answer, I'm giving a clue. Lactate oxidase is a rubbish enzyme. And so anyone who's making good lactate oxidase based sensors is giving you good clues about how to immobilize your enzyme. So when we generate new enzymes, they're often, they've not been engineered for great robustness, so they can be quite fragile. Lactate oxidase is definitely a fragile enzyme. Read papers on the immobilization of lactate oxidase. That's the sort of best clue I could give in the time that I'd actually given myself. I think this question might come in something like Thursday, and tonight's Saturday night, so I've sort of tried to do it quite quickly. I would give a few more clues actually as well. That I think if you're making enzyme sensors, I think it's easiest, especially when you've got reductases and oxidases, to use platinum. But platinum is flipping expensive. All right, so I would just say go for carbon. I would say there's plenty of papers talking about Prussian blue, oxidases and reductases. They can be used with Prussian blue, so I would definitely look at papers with Prussian blue. Then I would be drop casting the enzyme on top of the electrode. Super biased. I'm showing our 501 carbon here, and I'm also showing our 301 carbon. I'm showing both of them because I think you actually might have to try both of them. It sounds really daft, but there's a complexity sometimes with screen printed electrodes, size of the counter electrode, the material of the counter electrode. So to ignore that complexity, I'm actually suggesting you try both the 301 and the 501. I think I like the 501 because it's got this circular electrode. You can just pipette onto it. But I like the 301 because it's got a silver chloride counter electrode, which it's a very nebulous answer, but I feel like it often actually helps, especially with lower power potentiostats. So the 501 is great for the circular electrode and ease of pipetting. The 301 is it called the 301? The rectangular one is good for, and I'll try to put some links underneath the video, is good because it's got this silver chloride counter electrode, which is really quite useful sometimes, especially with potentiostats that are a little bit lower power. Many potentiostats these days are actually becoming lower power. If your potentiostats plugged into the mains, then you probably worry less about something called the compliance voltage. And then look up barrier layers. I do think that you can make a rubbish enzyme look better if you put what's called a barrier layer. Glucose sensors always use a barrier layer. We often use a barrier layer. So you may have an enzyme that may be functional but does not have enough activity. Well, you can preserve its activity and get a better application range. And when I say application range, I mean range of analyte, concentration of analyte. If you put a barrier layer down, a barrier layer is essentially blocking some of the molecules, some of the analytes get into the enzyme. So you're kind of increasing the range of concentration of enzyme, but analyte that you can actually detect. So I think you need carbon electrode. I would actually go for the Prussian blue catalytic layer. I would put an enzyme, just deposit the enzyme by drop casting. I think lactate oxidase papers are a good place to find those formulations. If you find a good one, please tell me. And the barrier layer is a good idea. I mean, if you Google ZP has a polyurethane barrier layer that we use on glucose and sensors, and that might be worth looking at. So, question number one. SenseIt is really an amazing platform for actually turning electrochemical assays, especially point of care diagnostic type assays, into MVPs really quickly. But you have to take the step. You have to do this. You can't talk and think. You have to do. Electronic yarn. A PhD is a good length of time in order to be able to do enough searching around. And I think there's also precedence for this of making pH sensitive yarn. I think it's good. I can tell you for definite, so we are making yarn-like yarn-like biosensors. We tend to do it in things like glucose and lactate because glucose is the biggest, glucose biosensors. You can appreciate the diabetes market. The wound care market is an interesting one because I think it's actually massive, but the technology hasn't come yet. People, just about now, smart bandages will be appearing, but they're not, and so we can't, doing a market analysis is hard. But I would definitely say PhD is the right route. But I would also say do a chapter in your thesis on pH screen printed electrodes as well, because then you're guaranteed to get some results whilst you're developing that material. Self-assemble monolayers on gold. Make sure you reduce that thiol. Make sure that you activate the gold just before the formation of the self-assembled monolayer. Make sure you use spacing molecules. Go for a simple, and then you can couple with EDC NHS. Just use a simple assay, like a blocking assay. And ZP has discussed that quite a lot on our website. The enzyme sensors, I didn't give you a great answer, but something that occurred to me as I was sort of running out of time was lactic oxidase papers are a good place to go looking. Platinum will work because often with oxidase and reductase, it doesn't scale well in cost. Does not scale well in cost. I would use a mediator like Prussian blue, which then turns carbon essentially platinum-like. Drop cast down that enzyme layer using a lactic oxidase formulation that you found, and then use the concept of barrier layers. ZP has a polyurethane barrier layer on our website, but barrier layers are something you should definitely look into, because it can, otherwise, your enzyme has a kind of low activity and you say, oh, it saturates very early. Well, if you put a barrier layer on it, then you can extend the range. You'll lose signal, but you'll extend concentration range. So if you've got any questions from ZP, all the questions I've answered tonight, that these people are, I don't believe any of them are actual clients or customers, but we do answer questions. We do hope that people do actually buy our technology, because that's really what's funding our capability of actually answering questions. You can appreciate that's the fuel, let's say, to this. So if you've got any questions about Sense It All and screen printed electrodes, and hopefully you want some, then I'll try and put some links underneath the video as well. Otherwise, we are happy to answer questions, and we often answer questions actually that are from people who are generally using our technology. So any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, thanks very much.